Daniel Carter, captain of the Earth Alliance Expeditionary Force, stood at the threshold of Glaciora, the legendary city of the Lirian people. His breath plumed into the frigid air, curling out of his mouth like vaporous pennants of white. Soldiers of the Alliance, arrayed in dark, heat-insulated uniforms behind him, glanced at one another uneasily. They had landed on Glaciora's outskirts only hours ago, responding to rumors of hostility on the frozen plains. Like shards of pale blue diamonds, the towers of Glaciora pierced the low-hanging clouds. It was a city carved into pillars of shimmering ice and stone, built upon the bed of an ancient glacier that had never fully melted. The gates, enormous, jagged archways of crystal, glowed faintly in the pale, refulgent sunlight. A hush fell over the small expedition team. On the wide expanse before the gates, rumbling with a thunderous snarl, stood a monstrous frost beast. Its fur was the color of snow at twilight, and its elongated tusks curved menacingly forward. Perched atop this beast with regal confidence sat Kyra, princess of the Lirians, and one of the most formidable warriors in the entire system. She was clad in shimmering, scaled armor of pale turquoise. A thick, fur-lined cloak trailed down her back, stirring in the icy wind. Her eyes, a penetrating shade of violet, locked onto Daniel. Her posture was rigid, her chin held high in a manner that exuded unwavering authority. She pointed a curved weapon, a gleaming spear carved from crystal and star metal, directly at him. "You dare challenge me, human?" she snarled, her voice resonating with a timbre that set every Alliance soldier's nerves on edge. Yet Daniel held his ground. Tall, with close-cropped sandy brown hair and resolute gray eyes, he was no stranger to confrontation. He had faced the unknown on myriad worlds in the name of peace, forging uneasy treaties with alien races far mightier than Earth's first expansion efforts could have predicted. "I come seeking peace," Daniel replied, his voice echoing across the frozen courtyard. "We have traveled far to understand your people, to end the hostilities that have claimed countless lives. The Earth Alliance extends its hand in friendship." Behind Kyra, the gates of Glaciora rumbled, as if the city itself disapproved. Huge spires of ice shimmered like watchful sentinels, and upon each parapet, Lirian warriors, broad-shouldered and fearsome, looked down. They held luminous crystal-tipped arrows nocked in long, curved bows. Each arrow glimmered with lethal potential. Kyra's frost beast snorted. Warm mist jetted from its nostrils, steaming in the cold air. Slowly, she lowered her spear, but her face betrayed no sign of yielding. "Peace, you say? Yet my father, the High King of Glaciora, has decreed that none may enter these gates without proving their worth. We are the children of the ice, the guardians of this land, and we bow to no outlanders. You must prove yourself in our trials." Daniel had heard rumors of these trials, whispered among the stars in dingy spaceports and refined consulates alike. The trials of the Lirian people were legendary, tests of combat, endurance, and wisdom. Many had tried. Few had succeeded. In that moment, Daniel realized that to avert war, to spare both humans and Lirians the agony of further bloodshed, he would have to partake in this ancient tradition. Drawing a deep breath, he nodded. "If trials are what you demand, then I will face them." Kyra's lips parted in a slight sneer. She twirled her crystal spear, its tip catching the broken rays of distant sunlight. "So be it, Captain Daniel Carter, envoy of Earth. Let these gates close behind you, and open only if you emerge victorious in each challenge. But know this, human, the trials are no mere ceremony. They will test every fiber of your being. Will you truly risk your life for peace?" Daniel's heart pounded. Yet, there was something within Kyra's eyes, an ember, glimmering amid the ice. It was not cruelty alone. Rather, it was an intense pride, perhaps even curiosity. She was used to subjugating invaders, not meeting them as equals. This could be the start of something momentous, either a forging of a new era or a catastrophic end. "I will risk everything," he replied firmly, with no quiver in his voice. Without another word, Kyra turned her beast toward the towering gates. The frosty ground cracked beneath the creature's massive paws. Slowly, the heavy gates of Glaciora swung open, revealing a grand courtyard of crystalline pillars. Daniel motioned for his team to hold, and they obeyed, casting him worried glances. He entered alone, guided by the princess and her fearsome mount. Inside, Glaciora was vast. Thrumming lights glided along the walls, powered by crystals embedded in the ice. The architecture was ancient yet strangely advanced. Lirians walked in dignified silence, large cloaks draped over their broad shoulders, or stood as silent sentries in corners of the city's labyrinthine streets. There was an otherworldly beauty to it all. As they progressed deeper into the city, an escort of Lirian guards formed around Daniel. Tall warriors with gleaming breastplates and fierce eyes that sparkled under the luminescent crystals overhead. Murmurs accompanied him. A human, some whispered, while others glowered with distrust. Kyra dismounted from the frost beast before an arching hall of colossal ice columns, each etched with swirling patterns. She did not offer Daniel so much as a glance of reassurance. She merely gestured for him to follow, her movements fluid, purposeful. The beast snorted in farewell, led away by stable keepers. The weight of countless stairs followed Daniel. He had traveled light years, spanning galaxies, for this moment, for a chance to forge peace. But as he passed beneath the grand arch and beheld the first dais of the trials, he realized there would be no turning back. The dais of the first trial lay beneath the high, domed ceiling of what the Lirians called the Hall of Ancestry. Scenes from their history were carved into the ice, telling of battles long past, alliances forged and broken, and the unyielding spirit of these proud people. Pillars soared upward, each pillar as cold and shimmering as glass. At the far end of the hall sat the High King himself, robed in flowing garments that radiated pale green light. He wore a crown fashioned from the horns of ancient frost beasts, and a mantle of silver fur draped his broad shoulders. His name was Oryx, and the set of his jaw betrayed no warmth. To his right stood Kyra, regal and intimidating. Her armor glinted like thousands of tiny mirrors. She stepped forward, raising her spear for silence. The hall's echoing conversation stilled. Hundreds of eyes bore into Daniel, who remained standing at attention in the center of the floor. "You claim you wish peace," the High King intoned, his voice resonating along the crystalline walls. "Earth's reach has grown wide. Still, the Lirian people cannot trust words alone. Our sovereignty has been threatened before." Daniel bowed respectfully. He met the king's gaze, showing no sign of fear. "I understand, Your Majesty. My life is in your hands. I accept the trials as you see fit." The king's lips formed a thin line. "So be it. The first trial shall be that of combat. You must meet our finest warrior in single battle, to test your prowess and your resolve. Should you survive, you may pass on to the next challenge." An unsettling hush gripped the hall. Lirian warriors, their angular faces shadowed by the flickering crystal light, regarded him with thinly veiled disdain. Slowly, one of them stepped forward. He was almost as tall as Daniel, but broader in shoulder, his skin marked by swirling tattoos that seemed etched with ice-blue ink. His name, Daniel would learn, was Skara, captain of the King's Guard. Kyra, silent at the king's side, watched with narrowed eyes. Though she had led Daniel here, it was Skara who would deliver the first blow. Daniel wondered if Kyra felt any sympathy for him, or if her earlier curiosity was merely a fleeting spark. He clenched his fists, a subtle testament to his own tension. A circular arena formed from columns of swirling light at the center of the hall. The floor's surface glistened with a thin layer of ice, making each step perilous. With a snap of his fingers, King Oryx activated mechanisms that raised short crystal spines at the outer edges of the arena, ensuring that flight, both literal and metaphorical, would not be an option. Skara advanced with the measured grace of a seasoned warrior. He brandished a long sword made of a metal Daniel did not recognize, flecked with glimmers of crystal. Runes engraved along the blade pulsed faintly, as though containing a slumbering power. Daniel had his own sidearm, a collapsible staff built from Earth's advanced alloys, which could project a protective energy field for brief moments. He had used it before against pirates and smugglers, but never in single combat with a Lirian champion. The Watchers formed a ring around the arena, their breath hushed. Kyra, from her place at her father's side, kept her eyes locked on Daniel. He sensed her intensity, the piercing gaze that followed his every motion. A resonant gong sounded sharp, brazen, final. Skara launched forward in a blinding dash, his sword arcing through the air with lethal grace. Daniel's reflexes kicked in, the staff deploying with a telescoping metallic clang. Sparks skidded across the ice as their weapons connected. Daniel was quick, but the Lirian was stronger. A single-handed blow drove Daniel back, sending him skidding. His boots fought for traction on the slick floor, nearly toppling him. Instead of retreating, Kyra pressed his advantage, aiming a fierce overhead strike that would have cleaved Daniel in two. Daniel's staff hummed as he activated its protective field, absorbing the brunt of the impact. The energy field crackled with azure electricity, diminishing but not failing. With a defiant grunt, Daniel pivoted, letting the slide of the ice carry him to Kyra's flank. He struck out in a smooth, sweeping motion. The staff's metallic tip connected with Kyra's waist, but the blow only staggered the Lirian warrior slightly. Kyra snarled, adrenaline flashing in his pale eyes. He spun with uncanny fluidity, drawing upon years of practice. Each move was steeped in tradition, a blend of artistry and brute force. Daniel blocked the next strike just in time, the clang of steel on alloy reverberating. His arms tingled from the impact, but he refused to buckle. Minutes passed, or so it seemed, as they traded thrusts and parries. With every blow, Daniel felt his arms tiring. But he maintained focus. At one point, Kyra's blade cut a shallow line across Daniel's shoulder, piercing his protective gear. Daniel grit his teeth, ignoring the pain. Blood spotted the ice, small ruby droplets that hissed in the cold. A renewed hush fell upon the observers. Perhaps they had expected the human to fall quickly. But Daniel endured. He conjured up every ounce of discipline gleaned from countless training simulations back on Earth, from scuffles in remote colonies where he had needed to protect innocents. Now, more than ever, his life's experiences converged into a single will to survive. Kyra lunged again, but misjudged on the slick floor. Daniel seized the moment. Darting under the Lirian's guard, he delivered a powerful, direct thrust to Kyra's midsection. The staff's tip, humming with residual energy, collided squarely with the warrior's torso. A resonant crack sounded. Kyra tumbled backward, colliding hard with the ice before sliding to a stop at the edge of the arena. A great collective intake of breath followed. Kyra's eyes flashed with admiration and something else, perhaps relief. The High King leaned forward, narrowing his gaze. In the hush of that moment, Daniel's ragged breathing echoed, small clouds of vapor forming with each exhale. Kyra's face contorted with pride warring against exhaustion. He tried to stand, trembling on one knee. His chest heaved. To the surprise of many, Daniel extended a hand. For a moment, confusion reigned. The watchers stiffened. Kyra stared at the offered gesture with incredulity, his face twisted in shame. After several heartbeats, he pushed Daniel's hand aside and rose under his own power, albeit unsteadily. The round ended. The watchers parted, some with expressions of grudging respect, others with suspicion. Daniel remained in the center, staff lowered, not pressing the advantage or humiliating his foe. At last, King Oryx raised his hand. The warrior Daniel Carter has proven he possesses skill enough for the first trial. The trial of combat is past. Cheers and murmurs mingled in equal measure. Lirian honor demanded they acknowledge a worthy foe. The High King's next words resonated throughout the Hall of Ancestry. Prepare yourself, Captain. Tomorrow, we convene the second trial. May your endurance prove as formidable as your blade. As the guards escorted Daniel away, he spared a glance at Kyra. She watched him, expression inscrutable, though he thought he saw a fleeting softness in her gaze. In that small moment of silence, a fragile bond began to form. That evening, Daniel was granted a small chamber in the citadel's northern wing. The walls were carved of translucent ice, through which the ambient glow of Lirian crystals offered soft illumination. He stripped off his torn gear, washing away the blood and grime at a basin fashioned from a hollowed stalactite. It seemed miraculous, in this endless winter land, that hot water was available. But the Lirians had harnessed geothermal energy deep beneath the glaciers, piping warmth into the upper levels. Daniel's shoulder burned where Kyra's blade had sliced him. He hissed as he applied a rudimentary antiseptic from his portable kit. He thought of Earth, thousands of parsecs away. So many faced hardships there: unrest, resource scarcity, the ever-widening expansion that pitted humanity against other species. There was something about Glaciora's frozen stillness that resonated with Daniel. He recognized a certain stoic nobility in these people, though he knew they could be unrelentingly brutal to those deemed unworthy. A knock echoed on the ice door. Startled, Daniel quickly set aside his medical kit, carefully refastening his uniform tunic. He opened the door to find Kyra, standing in the corridor. A slender corridor lamp cast a faint glow upon her face. She was no longer clad in full armor. A simpler, yet still ornate, fur-lined robe covered her shoulders. Her hands were clasped before her, empty of weapons. "May I enter?" she asked quietly, the usual steel in her voice tempered by caution. Daniel stepped aside, motioning her into the small chamber. She glided across the ice floor, halting near the crystalline window that overlooked the labyrinth of Glaciora's streets. For a moment, she gazed out at the city. Frosty breath from the outer cold drifted across the glass. "I did not expect you to prevail against Kyra," she admitted. "He is formidable even among our elite. Yet you surprised him with your speed, and above all, your refusal to yield." Daniel stood a respectful distance away. "I meant no disrespect to your champion, but I had to prove to you, and to your father, that Earth seeks peace through determination, not conquest, not subjugation." Kyra turned, studying him carefully. "You speak of peace with such conviction. But the Lirians have known other travelers who arrived promising treaties and trade. It always began kindly enough. Then they turned on us. Some wanted our crystals. Others coveted our advanced forging techniques. We have trust in few, friend in none." The intensity in her voice made Daniel's heart tighten. Earth had done its share of questionable expansions in the past. He suspected the Lirians had reason to be suspicious. He sat on the edge of a low ice bench carved into the wall. "I can't change the past, but I can show you that not all species are the same. We want an alliance built on mutual respect." Kyra's gaze dropped to the floor, then rose again. "You realize the second trial is one of endurance? They will send you to the gray tundra, a place of harsh winds, beasts, and illusions conjured by the flickering auroras. You must last until the final moonrise before you can return. Many have not survived." Her words sent a chill through him, beyond the literal cold that already penetrated everything. Still, he met her eyes steadily. "I will endure." A faint smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Then you had best rest. I came to see if you required any salve for your wound." The cut was deep. He shook his head, touched by her concern. "It's handled. Thank you." She nodded and started to leave, but paused at the threshold. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Finally, Kyra said in a low voice, "If you perish in the gray tundra, all your talk of peace perishes with you. Remember that. Daniel Carter." With that, she turned and vanished into the corridor, leaving Daniel alone under the soft glow of the crystals. He exhaled, slow and measured, preparing himself mentally for what lay ahead. Outside the window, the sky shimmered with icy starlight. The trials were far from over, and a heavy sense of responsibility filled him. If he failed, it would not just be his life at stake, but the fragile hope for peace between two peoples perched on the brink of war. At dawn, an escort of Lirian guards led Daniel through one of Glaciora's side gates. The city walls rose behind them like a colossal shield of ice. Ahead, the tundra stretched into an endless wasteland of swirling winds and jagged rocks. Distant peaks loomed, wearing crowns of perpetual snow. This was the gray tundra, a name that undersold the ferocity lurking there. A Lirian elder, wrapped in heavy furs, approached Daniel with solemn steps. "The second trial will end at the rising of the second moon on the horizon," he intoned. "Survive until then, and you shall have proven your endurance. Use what you carry. No additional provisions will be granted." Daniel nodded, shouldering a compact pack. In it, he had meager rations, a thermal blanket, and his staff. He wore a specialized suit that retained body heat, a product of Earth's advanced engineering. Yet even the best gear Earth had to offer felt laughably inadequate against the biting cold of Glaciora's outlands. Before Daniel set out, he caught sight of Kyra astride her beast on a nearby ridge. She appeared distant, a lone sentinel watching as the human walked into desolation. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and she offered him a curt nod. Was it encouragement, or a mere acknowledgement of the test unfolding? The wind whipped across the plains, tugging at Daniel's coat. It took only minutes for the city's silhouette to fade behind him, replaced by an ocean of whiteness. Ice crystals skittered across the ground, and the shriek of the gale filled his ears. His boots crunched over compacted snow and shards of frozen rock. He moved steadily, mindful of the swirling gusts that could steal warmth from his body in seconds. Hours passed. The sky overhead was a subdued gray, mirroring the tundra's name. Icicles formed on the brim of his hood, and each breath came out in ragged plumes. But Daniel marched on, pausing only to sip water and ration his supply. Eventually, the endless plain gave way to a rugged valley carved by ancient glaciers. As twilight approached, the wind slowed, replaced by an eerie stillness. The temperature plummeted further, the chill gnawing at Daniel's bones. He found partial shelter beside a jagged rock outcrop, piling snow around it to block the worst of the gusts. He started a small heater from his pack, a last resort measure he would ration carefully. The meager flicker of warmth offered some respite, but the creeping cold was relentless. Night on Glaciora was a symphony of ghostly lights. Auroras danced in ribbons of blue and green, drifting across the sky like intangible spirits. Their luminescence flickered upon the tundra, creating illusions of shifting shapes. Legend held that travelers in the gray tundra saw apparitions of their past, visions that confounded the mind. Daniel felt a pang of apprehension. He had been warned, yet nothing could fully prepare him for the spectacle of twisting lights above. Still, he pressed on through the night, dividing his time between cautious trekking and short rests. His limbs grew numb, and every footstep burned with cold. Yet he refused to succumb. He repeated a mantra in his mind, an affirmation of purpose, peace for Earth, and for Glaciora. At one point, near midnight, he spotted a distant silhouette prowling across the ridge. A frost wolf, perhaps, or another predator adapted to this frozen realm. He kept his staff ready, ears straining for the slightest sound. The figure melted into the darkness. Daniel continued, his breath quivering in the silence. Dawn came sluggishly, the horizon lit by pale light. Daniel's lips were cracked and his muscles ached, but he trudged onward. The second moon would rise that evening, marking the official end of his trial. Could he last another cycle, or would the tundra claim him? The question burrowed into his thoughts. By midday, a low growl drifted on the wind. Daniel froze, scanning the frozen terrain. A hulking shape emerged from behind an icy boulder, spines bristling along its back. It resembled a massive wolverine-like creature, adapted to the glacial environment. Saliva dripped from its jaws, steaming in the cold. A Glaciaran ridgeback, he realized, one of the more dangerous predators described in the Alliance's scouting reports. Slowly, Daniel raised his staff. The beast snarled, revealing razor-sharp teeth. Its eyes glowed with hunger, or perhaps territorial rage. There was nowhere to run. The tundra stretched out in every direction, offering no cover but a few scattered rocks. The ridgeback lunged without warning. Daniel's staff crackled with a defensive field as he braced himself. The creature's bulk collided with him, sending him sliding across the ice. Pain flared in his shoulder. He fought to stay conscious, to keep the staff between them. The beast snapped its jaws, each bite landing painfully close. Summoning his last reserves of energy, Daniel rolled sideways, the staff's energy matrix whining under pressure. He brought the tip beneath the creature's torso, unleashing a short burst of power. A sharp, crackling discharge filled the air. The ridgeback howled, momentarily stunned. Daniel seized the chance to scramble to his feet. But the creature was not finished. Its jaws latched onto Daniel's pack, tearing through fabric. Supplies spilled out. With a guttural shout, Daniel struck the beast's flank, the staff flaring again. This time the ridgeback retreated, limping and snarling, its fur singed by the short bursts of electricity. Deciding its prey was too troublesome, it bounded away, blood dripping from a shallow wound in its side. Daniel collapsed to his knees, panting. His pack was in tatters, some of his rations lost, but the staff was still functional. The ordeal left him bruised and trembling, with fresh cuts along his arms. It took precious minutes to gather himself, to check what remained of his gear. Enough water capsules were left for a day, perhaps. He had to keep moving. By late afternoon, with the shadows lengthening, Daniel spotted a faint flicker of movement. At first, he thought it was another predator, but as he drew closer, he realized it was Kyra, mounted on her frost beast, keeping distant watch. She did not approach him, but she made no effort to conceal her presence. Perhaps she was ensuring he adhered to the conditions of the trial without actually intervening. Or maybe she was prepared to rescue him if some monstrous threat proved too deadly. The final hours leading up to moonrise were a battle of will. The cold seemed to worsen with every step. Daniel's mind drifted, illusions danced at the edge of his vision. Warm fires, the laughter of old friends, the face of a comrade he had lost in a prior mission. Several times, he stumbled, losing sense of direction. The wind carried faint echoes of his name, swirling with the aurora's spectral lights. But then, At last, the second moon began its ascent, a pale orb cresting the horizon. Its milky glow spread across the tundra. In the distance, Daniel saw movement. Lirian guards approached in a small party, led by Kyra, who apparently recovered from the previous day's defeat. They stopped before him, forming a semicircle. "You have survived," Kyra said, his voice devoid of mockery. "The second trial is complete. Return with us." Though his limbs were numb, Daniel mustered a nod. His throat felt raw, and his words came out in a husky rasp. "Then lead the way." The Lirians helped him onto a spare frost steed, a sturdier beast that puffed white clouds of breath into the air. As Daniel slumped in the saddle, half-conscious, he glimpsed Kyra watching from a short distance. Their gazes met once more. For the first time, he thought he saw genuine relief in her eyes, as though the thought of him perishing here had troubled her more than she cared to admit. With that, he let exhaustion take him, trusting the Lirians to guide him back to the city he had risked everything to protect, not only from war, but from the darkness of misunderstanding. Once more within Glaciora's icy walls, Daniel recuperated in the king's own infirmary, a vaulted chamber of swirling lights, where Lirian healers tended to him with potent salves. Days passed, filled with a haze of dull aches and ephemeral dreams. He recalled a kind old healer pressing a steaming cup of broth to his lips. He remembered glimpses of Kyra standing at the threshold, her arms folded, an unreadable expression on her face. When at last the worst of his fatigue lifted, Daniel woke to find the king's steward, a dignified Lirian named Varys, waiting at his bedside. Varys offered a respectful nod, stepping aside to let Daniel sit up on the infirmary cot. "The High King commends your endurance," Varys said in a measured tone. "You have passed the second trial, an honor few outsiders have achieved. The final trial will begin soon." Daniel managed a weary smile, wincing as he swung his feet to the floor. "Trial of wisdom," he recalled. "I've heard rumors, but no details. What does it entail?" Varys' face was grave. "That remains for the king to decree. In our history, the trial of wisdom has taken many forms. Sometimes it is a riddle of cosmic significance, other times an elaborate negotiation to test cunning and empathy. But you must face it alone, with no counsel or aid." Daniel suppressed a groan. Combat and endurance had tested him physically, but the looming test of wisdom could be far subtler. He nodded, thanking Varys for the information. Soon, he was well enough to walk. The healers reluctantly allowed him to leave the infirmary, advising him to rest. But rest was the last thing on Daniel's mind. He found himself wandering Glaciora's corridors, absorbing the city's austere beauty. Colossal halls, inlaid with runic markings that told of ancient heroes, soared above. The hum of hidden machinery spoke to Lyria's advanced knowledge. And always, that pervasive chill clung to every surface. In a quiet courtyard, he happened upon Kyra. She stood beside a frozen fountain where the water was locked in perpetual stasis, the spires of ice shaped like delicate glass sculptures. Her cloak rippled in a gentle draft, the only movement in the stillness. She noticed him at once, turning slowly. "You recover quickly," she observed. "I'd have wagered you'd need more days in bed." "I'm stubborn," Daniel replied with a faint grin. "Besides, I couldn't stay cooped up. The city has a way of calling me to explore." Kyra inclined her head toward a crystalline bench, inviting him to sit. They settled across from one another, an unspoken tension in the air. Daniel studied her features, strong cheekbones, the proud set of her chin, the flicker of something indefinable behind her violet eyes. She regarded him intently. "You passed the second trial when many would have succumbed to the cold. Why do you persist? Is it merely a sense of duty to Earth, or something else?" For a moment, Daniel considered how best to answer. He could speak of alliances, treaties, and the Earth Alliance's hopes to prevent war. But the truth ran deeper now. "I do represent Earth, and yes, that's part of it," he began, his voice echoing softly in the courtyard. "But in the short time I've been here, I've sensed the nobility of your people. I feel something worth protecting. And he paused, faltering slightly under her searching gaze. "I've seen that you're not just warriors who crave conquest. You cherish honor, and you stand loyal to your traditions." Kyra's stare hardened, as though she were fighting within herself. "Our traditions have kept us alive on this unforgiving world. They have carved us into who we are. But they have also isolated us, perhaps even blinded us to the possibility of friendship. My father believes that only the strong can be friends, and that trust is always precarious. Daniel exhaled. I want to change that dynamic, to show him and your people that the universe is not solely conquest and betrayal. But I won't lie, I may fail. The final trial might demand more than I can offer. She folded her arms, her demeanor guarded. But there was an undercurrent of empathy in her posture. I saw you on the tundra. You refused to yield even when the cold nearly claimed you. You strive for something beyond personal glory. That, I can respect, whether you succeed or fall. Those words, spoken simply, warmed Daniel more than the stifled heat in the corridors. Thank you, Princess. She gave a slight nod, eyes lingering on him. In the hush that followed, Daniel felt an unspoken bond forming. It was not yet trust, not entirely. But it was a crack in the ice, a fissure that could expand given time. When the day of the final trial arrived, the Hall of Ancestry was once again filled with Lirian onlookers. The luminous crystals in the vaulted ceiling pulsed in rhythmic patterns, casting shifting hues across the crowd. At the far end of the hall, on a dais ringed by carved pillars, King Oryx sat flanked by his advisors. Kyra stood nearby, arms folded, face solemn. Daniel approached, bowing respectfully. He wore the patched remains of his Earth expedition gear, cleaned but still bearing cuts and scorch marks, a silent testament to his journey thus far. A hush settled. The time has come, the king announced. You have shown your strength in battle, your resilience in the tundra, and now, we test your mind and spirit. The trial of wisdom shall be this. You must traverse the maze of reflections and retrieve the scepter of convergence from the cenotaph of elders. Return it here, and you shall prove your worth. A subdued murmur rippled among the onlookers. Daniel had heard enough rumors to know that the maze of reflections was a labyrinth deep beneath Glaciora, filled with illusions conjured by living crystals. Lirian spoke of travelers who were trapped by their own fears and desires, never finding the exit. The scepter of convergence was an artifact said to unify conflicting energies. It rested in the labyrinth's heart, protected by riddles and hidden passages. A guard stepped forward, thrusting a small crystal lamp into Daniel's hand. This is your only light. The maze yields to none but a true seeker. So it began. Daniel was escorted to a spiral stair that wound downward, plunging beneath Glaciora's foundation. Each step took him deeper into the bowels of the ancient city. The temperature dropped even further. At last, he reached a colossal door carved with swirling motifs, reminiscent of galaxies. It creaked open of its own accord. Inside lay utter darkness, except for faint flickers of luminescence dancing on distant walls. With a deep breath, Daniel raised the crystal lamp and stepped through. The door closed behind him, sealing with a resonant thud. He found himself in a corridor lined with shimmering mirrors of polished ice. As he moved deeper, the mirrors multiplied, reflecting his silhouette and the lamp's glow in an endless corridor. He could not tell which path was real or which reflection was but a trick of the light. He tried to remain calm, remembering what little advice he had gleaned. In the maze of reflections, illusions preyed upon one's insecurities. Keep your purpose clear, he reminded himself. Retrieve the scepter, prove your wisdom, secure peace. But the maze had other plans. It led him through twisting passageways where voices echoed off the walls, mirroring his own doubts in disquieting whispers. At times, he thought he heard old comrades calling out, or glimpsed the faces of lost friends. He pressed on, one hand trailing along the right wall, hoping the simplest of labyrinth strategies might guide him. At a fork, the corridor to the left revealed a reflection that startled him. He saw himself wearing the regalia of a Lirian champion, with Kyra by his side, both of them ruling over a united kingdom of Lirians and humans. Was it a vision of the future or a false promise conjured by the maze? He took a shaky step forward. The reflection dissolved, replaced by a scene of Earth's cities burning, war raging across galaxies. Daniel stumbled back, heart pounding, uncertain whether the illusion spoke truth or merely darkest fears. His mind reeled, struggling to hold on to reality. Focus, he whispered through chattering teeth. This is a test, nothing more. Time blurred. He wandered for what felt like hours, days, even. The lamp's glow diminished, causing shadows to loom. Then, faintly, an azure glimmer appeared down a side corridor. He followed it, hope flickering in his chest. Rounding a bend, he entered a circular chamber with a pillar at its center. On the pillar rested the scepter of convergence, a slender rod of crystalline metal, crowned by two entwined shards. They seemed alive, swirling with hues of turquoise and amethyst. For a moment, Daniel felt an otherworldly resonance, as though the scepter sang a silent note that vibrated in his bones. He approached carefully, not wanting to trigger traps. Yet the scepter remained unguarded, no monstrous sentinel or trick step. In fact, the entire chamber felt oddly calm. Uncertain, Daniel reached out and lifted the artifact, half expecting illusions to swarm him. Instead, a hum coursed through his arm, and the scepter glowed softly, as though acknowledging him. He allowed himself a moment of relief. So far, so good, he muttered. But when he turned to leave, the walls had shifted. The entrance vanished. In its place were three mirrored corridors, each reflecting him holding the scepter. How to determine the real path? He tested one corridor, placing a tentative foot inside, only to find the reflection parted like smoke, revealing solid ice behind it. The second corridor did the same. He frowned, glancing at the third. There was something off about the reflection in the third corridor. His face looked older, lined with worry. Yet it flickered in and out, as if the mirror was cracked. He approached, scepter in hand, and gently pressed his free hand against the glass. A subtle jolt pricked his fingers. Then the mirror dissolved, revealing a rough-hewn tunnel beyond. With cautious steps, Daniel ventured forward, ignoring the uneasy churn in his stomach. After winding through more corridors, he spotted a faint upward slope, a sign that he might be nearing an exit. The illusions, however, were far from finished. He found himself in a corridor lined with shimmering reflections of Kyra. They appeared in different forms, some regal, some wounded, some stern, some tender. Each reflection spoke a different phrase. I despise you, human. I trust you. Leave Glaciora and never return. Stay with me. Their voices overlapped, echoing unnervingly. Daniel's heart pounded, but he refused to be paralyzed by these illusions. Clutching the scepter, he focused on what he knew of Kyra, her fierce pride, her desire to protect her people, the flicker of vulnerability she guarded so well. She is real, he told himself aloud, stepping through the corridor. These are shadows, trying to manipulate me. He staggered forward, refusing to engage with the illusions. A bright flash seared his vision, and then the corridor vanished. The next thing he knew, he was standing at the foot of the spiral stair, the door to the maze looming behind him, open once more. He blinked, disoriented, uncertain how the transition had occurred. But the scepter was still in his grasp, humming with a gentle energy. He had succeeded. The return to the Hall of Ancestry was marked by a reverent hush. Word had spread that Daniel Carter, the human, had emerged from the maze of reflections carrying the scepter of convergence. Lirian onlookers lined the corridors, some kneeling, others simply staring. Even Skara stood with silent respect. King Oryx watched intently from the dais, eyes narrowed. Beside him stood Kyra, her posture tense. Daniel approached, each footstep echoing off the polished ice floor. When he stood before the High King, he bowed and held out the scepter, presenting it with both hands. The king studied the artifact. Its shimmering shards glowed faintly, swirling in subtle patterns that reflected the onlookers' flickering torches. A murmur ran through the hall, a tangible wave of awe. You have done what few outsiders, or even Lirians, have accomplished, King Oryx said in a slow, measured voice. You endured the illusions, retrieved the scepter, and returned. A pause lengthened. Then the king rose from his throne. He gestured for Daniel to rise as well, allowing the human to hold the scepter for a moment longer, as though the king wished to see if it truly resonated with him. Captain Daniel Carter, the king pronounced, by completing the trials, you have proven not only your strength and endurance, but also your wisdom in seeking that which unites rather than divides. I hereby grant you the honor of the 3 trials, a recognition seldom bestowed upon an outsider. An audible gasp arose, followed by quiet applause. Daniel exhaled slowly, bowing again. This was the moment he had prayed for, a chance to open a path for peace between Earth and Glaciora. He stole a glance at Kyra, who met his gaze with a proud, solemn smile. Therefore, continued King Oryx, we shall consider the possibility of an accord between our peoples. Let it be known that Glaciora will welcome ambassadors from Earth for a dialogue of trade and mutual defense. A soft cheer rippled among Daniel's expedition team, those who were allowed entrance to witness the final stage. There was still caution among many Lirians, but in that fleeting moment, hope thrived in the Hall of Ancestry. Later, a banquet was prepared in Daniel's honor, though banquet was a relative term in the austere city. Long tables of ice were set with modest portions of preserved meats, hearty vegetables grown in geothermal greenhouses, and spiced teas that warmed the body. Lirian and Earth Alliance soldiers mingled, or at least stood in the same vicinity without animosity. Scara toasted Daniel with a curt nod, acknowledging him not as an enemy, but as a worthy equal. Across the hall, Daniel noticed Kyra standing apart from the celebrations, near one of the towering ice sculptures that adorned the banquet chamber. He wove through the crowd, ignoring curious glances, until he was by her side. "You did it," she murmured, her tone both proud and contemplative. "You humbled the maze, and you hold my people's respect. That's no small feat for any mortal." He inclined his head, feeling both satisfaction and a sense of weighty responsibility. "I only did what was necessary to prevent war, but I could never have done it without." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Without your guidance, without understanding what truly matters to the Lirians." Kyra studied him in silence. Then, unexpectedly, she reached up, her gloved hand brushing a stray strand of hair from his forehead. The gesture was intimate, surprising Daniel. "Glaciora is not easily swayed. But for you, I see a determination that might one day rival our own. Be proud, but remain vigilant. There are still those among us who distrust any foreign power." A faint smile crossed her lips, and she looked at him with something akin to admiration. "You are no longer just an outsider to me." There, in the midst of icy halls and watchful eyes, Daniel felt the first stirrings of a bond that transcended politics or fleeting alliances. It was fragile, but it glowed as brightly as the shimmering crystals overhead. Days turned to weeks, and the seeds of diplomacy were sown. Earth emissaries arrived in small delegations, forging the beginnings of an official treaty with King Oryx. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to observe Lirian culture firsthand, learning their language's subtleties, their forging methods, and even sparring in friendly combat sessions. There were tensions, of course, factions within Glaciora that scoffed at the notion of aligning with Earth, and Earth Alliance members who doubted the sincerity of Lirian cooperation. But those tensions did not erupt into outright violence, thanks in large part to the respect Daniel had earned. Often, Daniel found himself in Kyra's company. They rode frost beasts across Glaciora's outlying ridges, surveying territory for potential Earth-Lirian joint outposts. Together, they discovered small pockets of Lirian settlements that had once borne the brunt of skirmishes against other spacefaring invaders. Everywhere they went, they heard the same refrain. "We remain ready to fight if threatened, but we yearn for a future free from war." One morning, Kyra led Daniel up a steep path to the city's highest rampart. From there, the entire realm of snow and ice lay sprawled before them, ringed by craggy mountains. The rising sun tinted the glacier's surface with pastel shades of pink and orange. "This is Glaciora at dawn," she said softly, halting her frost beast to let Daniel's mount catch up. "Some travelers say it's the most peaceful sight in the galaxy." Daniel dismounted, letting the creature stomp through the fresh powder. He joined Kyra at the edge of the rampart, gazing out over the breathless vista. Wind combed through their hair, carrying the faint scent of crystalline air. "You've opened my eyes to the beauty of this place," he said quietly. "Before coming here, I only knew rumors, tales of savage warriors, a fortress of ice. But now, I see a proud civilization, shaped by these harsh conditions, yet profoundly alive." Kyra's expression softened. In the stillness, their gloved hands brushed. "And I, in turn, have seen something unexpected in a human," she replied, eyes flickering with warmth. Courage mingled with compassion. They stood like that for a while, the hush of dawn enveloping them. Words were scarce, yet the silence spoke volumes. Gradually, the sun ascended higher, painting the frozen plains with harsh clarity. Yet for all this closeness, the future remained uncertain. Diplomatic efforts were slow, and some Lirian elders vehemently challenged King Oryx's new stance. They recalled centuries of isolation, of fending off invaders, and they feared this new alliance would erode their sovereignty. On Earth's side, certain factions questioned the cost of forging alliances with worlds that might one day become rivals. Amid these concerns, Daniel and Kyra stood as living symbols of unity, their growing bond a testament to what might be possible. The last vestiges of winter's darkest season were giving way to a marginal thaw. Night skies grew shorter. The city's geothermal labs indicated a slight upturn in temperature, not enough to melt Glaciora's foundations, but enough to ease daily life. In the Hall of Convergence, the scepter Daniel had retrieved was kept on display, a reminder to Lirian and Earth dignitaries alike of the trial's significance. But storm clouds of another sort gathered. A rumor spread through Glaciora's underground circles. An exiled Lirian warlord, once banished by King Oryx, had rallied a band of renegades. They planned to disrupt the budding peace with Earth, claiming the city was weakening under foreign influence. Late one night, an explosion rocked one of the city's minor gates, sending shrapnel and ice shards clattering through the streets. Alarms blared. Daniel and Kyra, roused from a discussion in the palace halls, rushed outside to find chaos. Guards scrambling to contain the breach, civilians shouting in confusion. In the flickering glow of the city's crystalline torches, they saw a group of armed Lirians, their faces hidden behind masks fashioned from beast skulls. At their head stood a tall figure with swirling tattoos etched in blood-red pigment. His name was Braille, once a general in Oryx's court, now a rogue warlord consumed by resentment. He roared above the din. "You would sell our birthright to these off-worlders? Glaciora belongs to the strong, untainted by alien hands. Rise, my brothers and sisters. Let us tear down these traitors who cower behind treaties." A surge of fear rippled through the populace. Guards formed a defensive line, but the renegades attacked swiftly, brandishing stolen crystal blades that glowed with power. Daniel found himself at the forefront, staff in hand. Beside him, Kyra unsheathed her spear, her eyes burning with fierce resolve. "Braille," Kyra's voice cut through the uproar. "You dishonor the throne. Stand down, or be cut down for your treason." The warlord sneered, ignoring her warning. His band pressed forward, colliding with the city guard in a clamor of steel and ice. Civilians scattered, seeking refuge behind barricades. Daniel's staff crackled, deflecting a blow aimed at a fleeing child. He pivoted, driving the renegade back with an arcing swing. Kyra engaged Braille directly. Their weapons clashed, sending sparks of crystalline energy ricocheting through the air. Braille snarled, striking with savage fury. Kyra parried, her technique honed by years of discipline. Yet Braille's strength was impressive, fueled by his fanatical rage. Seeing an opening, Daniel lunged at Braille's flank, forcing him to split his attention. The warlord roared, outraged that a human dared to attack him. He slammed a gauntlet fist into Daniel's torso, driving the breath from his lungs. Daniel staggered, but recovered in time to deflect another blow with his staff's energy field. Amid the swirling battle, the city's defenders rallied. King Oryx's personal guard arrived, pushing back the renegades. Their momentum flagged, but Braille refused to concede. He launched a desperate assault on Kyra, swinging a crystal-bladed axe. She dodged, but the blade nicked her arm, drawing blood. Daniel, adrenaline surging, delivered a punishing strike to Braille's side, causing him to stumble. Kyra seized the moment. She spun her spear in a deadly arc, disarming Braille with a precise thrust. His axe clattered away. Panting, he tried to retrieve it, but Daniel kicked it across the ice. Surrounded by Lirian guards, Braille hissed in defiance. "You align yourself with lesser beings." Braille spat, glaring at Kyra. "Your father's reign falters, as does yours." Her gaze was ice-cold. "Your words hold no power here, traitor. The city stands united against you." At that, the guards restrained Braille, locking him in energy manacles. His band of renegades was swiftly rounded up, while the wounded were carried to the infirmary. Daniel extended a hand to Kyra, who clutched her bleeding arm. "You're hurt," he said softly, concern etched on his face. She brushed off the wound with a half-smile, though it was clear she was in pain. A flesh wound. I've had worse. Come, let's see to the injured. In the aftermath, the attempted insurrection only served to solidify the alliance. Many Lirians realized that Earth's presence wasn't the threat, extremism was. Still, the cost was not light. City walls were damaged, and trust was shaken. However, from the ashes of the conflict, a renewed determination emerged to see the treaty ratified. That night, Daniel and Kyra stood on a balcony overlooking the battered gate. A hush settled over Glaciora, the aurora's faint overhead. She leaned on the balustrade, cradling her bandaged arm. "Thank you for fighting beside me," she murmured, her voice subdued. "I was raised to believe we needed no one outside our own. But tonight, you proved me wrong. Perhaps we all need each other." Daniel looked at her, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "I'd fight by your side any day, Kyra." A flicker of emotion passed over her face. In a rare moment of openness, she leaned in, resting her forehead gently against his, eyes closed. "Daniel," she whispered, voice choked with uncertainty. "When all this ends, when your people finalize the treaty and you're called back home, will you remember us? Remember me?" He placed a careful hand on her cheek, thumb brushing a tear she refused to shed. "I couldn't forget this place. Were you? Ever?" They lingered in that tender silence, aware that their fates, human and Lirian, were now entwined. Whether destiny or chance had guided them together, neither could deny the bond forged through fire and ice. A grand assembly convened in the Hall of Ancestry, the place where Daniel had first been tested. This time, the seats were filled by dignitaries from Earth and high-ranking members of Glaciora's council. King Oryx presided at the center, wearing robes of state. Kyra stood to his left, a symbol of hope for a new generation. The final negotiations proceeded. Under the watchful gaze of the entire city, the king signed a formal accord with the Earth Alliance, establishing mutual respect, trade, and military cooperation in the face of external threats. Applause thundered when the last signature was laid down. Even the most skeptical elders had been swayed by Daniel's bravery in the trials and the failed revolt that had proven the true threat lay within, not from outside. Daniel stood among the Earth dignitaries, heart pounding with triumph. He glanced at Kyra, who met his gaze with a glowing smile. In that moment, it felt as though all obstacles had been surmounted, a bright path laid out for two peoples once separated by mistrust. And yet, as the ceremony concluded, Daniel felt a tug of sorrow. His mission was complete. Earth's envoy ships were scheduled to leave soon, and the newly formed alliance required him to return to oversee the next phase of cooperation from the home front. Would he abandon this place that had claimed his heart in so short a time? That evening, a quiet tension filled the corridor outside the palace chambers. Daniel and Kyra walked side by side, their footsteps echoing against the ice. Neither spoke. They reached an alcove near a frosted window that overlooked Glaciora's far horizon, where the pale sun was setting in streaks of amber and violet. At last, Daniel spoke, his voice subdued. "The Earth Council wants me back to present a full report. They say it's urgent, that new negotiations will commence, possibly delegations stationed here. But he trailed off, fighting an unexpected sting behind his eyes. Kyra turned to him, searching his face. "You have your duties," she said quietly, though her voice shook ever so slightly. "I understand. You've accomplished what no one else could, bridged two worlds." He inhaled, steadying himself. "I never anticipated that bridging these worlds would come at such a personal cost. Kyra, he hesitated, words failing him. Finally, he reached for her hands, clasping them gently. "I don't want to lose what we have found." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She squeezed his hands. "We are not lost to each other. Glaciora's gates are open to you and your people. More than that, she paused, forcing a trembling exhale. "I wish I could journey with you, but my father's kingdom needs me now more than ever. I must help him ensure this peace truly lasts." They fell silent, the weight of reality crashing around them. Two souls brought together in an improbable alliance, now facing separation by the demands of their stations. The corridor's glow dimmed with the waning daylight, reflecting the somber mood they shared. "What if this is goodbye?" Daniel managed, a quiver in his voice. Kyra stepped closer, her features illuminated by the faint glimmer of luminous crystals embedded in the walls. Then let our farewell be worthy of the connection we share. I would not have met you, would not have understood this possibility of peace, if fate had not guided you here. For that, I am eternally grateful. He pulled her gently into an embrace. The cold corridor suddenly felt warm with her near. She pressed her forehead to his, just as she had weeks earlier, her breath mingling with his. For a moment, time froze, the swirl of politics, obligations, and cosmic distances forgotten. Slowly, they parted. Her eyes burned with fierce determination. Go home, Daniel Carter. Show them the truth of Glaciora. Stand as our advocate. And when the time is right, return. He nodded, jaw clenched to hold back emotion. I promise. The next day, under a sky painted by the planet's shimmering auroras, Daniel boarded the Alliance shuttle. A small gathering of Lirians, including Kyra and King Oryx, stood at the spaceport's edge, carved from the ice. The engines roared to life, dispersing swirling snow into the air. Daniel's final glimpse of Kyra was of her standing tall, her cloak fluttering, eyes shining with bittersweet resolve. She lifted a hand in farewell, and he mirrored the gesture. As the craft soared into Glaciora's atmosphere, leaving behind the towers of ice and the labyrinthine city that had tested every fiber of his being, Daniel felt an ache in his chest, painful, but also strangely comforting, as though he carried a piece of Glaciora with him. In the months that followed, the treaty between Earth and Glaciora blossomed into tangible cooperation. Exchange programs were established. Lirian warriors and scientists traveled to Earth, while human diplomats and engineers arrived on Glaciora. Reports of new joint ventures, from harnessing geothermal power to refining crystal-based energy fields, filled interstellar news channels. And though galaxies separated them, Daniel and Kyra found ways to communicate. Intermittent quantum transmissions, bearing short but heartfelt messages. Each note reminded them of the promise they had sealed, the vow to bridge the distance with hope, one day to meet again. In the annals of both Earth and Glaciora, the day Daniel Carter passed the Lirian trials became a milestone. Scholars spoke of how a single human's resolve cracked the ice of centuries-old isolation. Children on Earth learned about Glaciora's majestic spires and fierce frost beasts, while Lirian youths practiced Earth's languages, dreaming of sunlit worlds beyond their tundra. And in quieter corners of the cosmos, a proud warrior princess and a steadfast Earth captain remained bound by a bond forged in challenge, adversity, and undeniable respect, each waiting for the stars to align so that their paths might cross once more.